In the city of Brookdale, where the elegant lights reflected on the crystal table of the Regency Table restaurant, a seemingly small story shook the entire community. One peaceful evening, Evelyn Moore, a 66-year-old black woman, walked into the restaurant. She was dressed simply, her hair streaked with silver, her smile gentle, and she just wanted to have dinner with her son, who was busy in a meeting at City Hall. But before her son arrived, something unexpected happened. The young waiter, Ryan Cooper, looked at her suspiciously. He thought she was a vagrant, then said coldly, "This restaurant does not serve people like you." The entire luxurious space suddenly froze. No one spoke. No one stopped. Only a phone in the corner of the room was quietly recording, and the whole city was about to witness silent justice, being spoken by a woman who did not say a word. One night at the Regency Table will change the way Brookdale views dignity, power, and kindness. If you believe that the truth doesn't need to be shouted out loud, please like, share, and subscribe, because today's story will be unforgettable. The Regency Table had a way of making people feel small. Crystal chandeliers hung low enough to catch the light on every diamond, every Rolex, every whisper that pretended to sound important. The air smelled of money and confidence served rare, with a side of arrogance. Evelyn Moore walked in quietly, the kind of quiet that comes from having lived long enough to know that silence is often safer than words. She was 66. Her coat was clean, but not new. Her shoes shined, but worn at the heels. She moved slowly, not because of age, but because she had learned the art of presence being where you are, not apologizing for it. The hostess looked her over with a quick, trained scan of class recognition. Eyes to shoes, shoes to hands, hands to face. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am," she asked, her politeness wrapped tightly around discomfort. "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "Table for two. Please, my son will join me soon." The hostess hesitated, eyes flicking to the corner of the dining room where a waiter, young, tall, self-assured, stood checking his reflection in a glass panel. His name was Ryan Cooper. Ryan approached, menu tucked under one arm, confidence under the other. "We might be full tonight," he said, scanning the reservation list without really looking. "Did you make a reservation?" "Ma'am, I believe my son did," Evelyn replied. "Marcus Moore." Ryan's pen stopped. He didn't recognize the name. He didn't care to. "Right. Well, until he gets here, maybe you can wait in the lobby. This area's for guests who've confirmed." Evelyn smiled, polite, patient. "I'll just sit here, if you don't mind. My son will be here soon." Ryan exhaled sharply through his nose. "Suit yourself," he muttered. He walked off, his body language a silent sermon on superiority. At table 9, Evelyn placed her small purse beside her water glass. Inside were $20, a folded parking ticket with the city seal of Brookdale, and a silver watch engraved on the back. "To Mom, from your mayor's son. Mem." She looked at it briefly, then covered it with her hand. "I won't use your name to protect me," she thought. "That's not the lesson I want you to learn about power." 10 minutes later, Ryan returned with another waitress. They whispered behind the counter, glancing her way, smirking. He finally walked back over. "Ma'am," he began, louder this time. "Just to be clear, the Regency Table has a dress code. It's formal dining. We can't have people waiting too long if they're not eating." He paused, waiting for her to feel embarrassed. She didn't. Instead, she met his gaze, eyes calm, almost kind. "I understand. I'll order when my son arrives. He's running late." "Right," Ryan said, his voice tightening. It's just that, well, we've had situations before. You know, people coming in, sitting around, making customers uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Evelyn asked gently. Have I done something to make you uncomfortable, young man? The question wasn't defensive. It was surgical, slow, deliberate, without venom. Ryan blinked. No. Look, you can't sit here unless you're dining. Okay, that's the policy. Then I'll dine, she said simply. When my son comes, across the room. A young woman in a gray sweater. Jasmine Reed noticed what was happening. She worked in local media, the kind of person who could smell a story the way others smell wine. She turned her phone slightly, camera angled toward the scene. Live stream. Title, Elderly Woman. Denied service at the Regency Table. Ryan didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. He leaned closer to Evelyn. Look, ma'am, you can't just come in here because it's warm. This isn't a shelter. That word shelter landed like a slap. The dining room went still. The couple at table 4 lowered their forks. The manager glanced up from her office door, unsure whether to intervene. Evelyn didn't move, didn't speak. Only the faint click of Jasmine's phone camera broke the silence. I could leave, Evelyn thought. I could get up, walk out, and let them believe they're right. That's how most of us survive things like this. But something in her chest, a tired, patient kind of courage, kept her still. I'll wait, she said. Ryan scoffed, muttering something under his breath about entitled folks. Then, louder, he called across the room. Calvin, we might need you over here. Calvin Harris, the security guard, was a man who didn't rush, a retired Marine, calm as stone. He came over slowly, scanning Evelyn's face before Ryan even finished explaining. She's just sitting, Calvin said evenly. She's not bothering anyone. Ryan frowned. Yeah, but she's refusing to leave. Maybe she's waiting for someone. Calvin replied. You ever thought of that? Ryan didn't like being questioned. He turned to the manager's office. Megan, can you come out here? Megan Carter, the manager, was in her 40s, polished and efficient. She looked at Evelyn, then at Ryan, then at the phone in Jasmine's hand recording everything. Her smile tightened. Good evening, she said to Evelyn. Is there a problem? Evelyn shook her head. No, dear. Just waiting for my son. She's been here almost 20 minutes. Ryan cut in. Hasn't ordered anything. Megan sighed. Ma'am, if you're not dining, we'll have to ask you to leave. We have to keep tables open for paying customers. I understand, Evelyn said, but I am a paying customer. Just not yet. At that moment, the clock above the bar ticked to 6:58. 2 minutes until 7. Her son's meeting at City Hall was ending. Ryan's tone sharpened. If you don't order now, I'll have to call the police. Your choice. The air in the restaurant turned thick, the way it does before a thunderstorm. Evelyn looked at him, not with anger, but with something heavier. Disappointment. Son, she said softly, do what you must, but I will wait for my child. She folded her hands on the table. No one spoke. No one moved. In that silence, 1,000 unseen histories echoed every diner, every bus seat, every whispered, you don't belong here. And somewhere, deep down, Ryan felt it too. The discomfort of realizing you might be the villain in a story you didn't mean to write. But he pushed it away. He turned toward the hostess stand, pulling out his phone. I'm calling, he said. Jasmine's livestream counter flashed 1.2K viewers. Comments poured in. This is disgusting. Who treats a woman like that? Is that the Regency Table? I've eaten there. The hum of public judgment began to rise. Evelyn exhaled slowly, eyes still on the clock. You taught me patience. Marcus, she thought. Maybe tonight. Patience will teach them something back. When the door opened and a familiar voice said, Mom, the whole room turned. But that belongs to another part of the story. For now, the sound of the ticking clock filled the space where justice was quietly waiting its turn. The clock above the bar clicked softly, each second stretching longer than the one before. The air in the Regency Table was no longer just thick with perfume and chatter. It was heavy with the weight of something unspoken, something everyone felt, but no one dared name. Evelyn Moore sat perfectly still at her table. Her posture was straight, her eyes calm, hands resting lightly on the linen. She didn't touch the water glass in front of her, didn't check her phone. She waited. Across the room, Ryan Cooper leaned on the counter, arms crossed, pretending to polish silverware. He watched her the way someone watches a stray dog that refuses to move off a porch. The other waiters whispered near the kitchen door. They had seen customers thrown out for less. I don't get it, one of them murmured. Why doesn't she just leave? Ryan shrugged, a short laugh escaping his nose. Some people don't know when they're not wanted. From her table, Evelyn could hear them. Not every word, but enough. The tones, the pauses, the disbelief that someone like her could belong in a place like this. She reached for her purse and slowly opened it. Inside was a small, organized world, a $20 bill folded neatly beside her identification, a parking ticket marked with the seal of Brookdale City, a business card embossed with the mayor's office emblem, and a silver watch. The engraving caught the dim light. To Mom, from your mayor's son, Mem. Her fingertips brushed the metal gently. The corners of her lips curved not a smile, but a quiet remembering. Marcus, you always said this city would change. Maybe it starts here, in the smallest of rooms. Evelyn took a slow breath and closed her purse. She placed it beside her again, where anyone could see it if they looked closely. But no one did. Megan Carter, the manager, had retreated to her office. Ryan stood at the host's stand, phone in hand, whispering to someone. A few patrons avoided looking at Evelyn altogether. They focused on their wine, their plates, their conversations that no longer sounded natural. Only Calvin Harris, the security guard, lingered nearby. He leaned against a column, eyes moving between Ryan and the elderly woman who refused to yield. Ma'am, he said quietly, stepping closer, do you want me to call someone? Maybe your son Evelyn turned her head slightly toward him. No, thank you, she said. He's finishing a meeting at City Hall. He'll be here soon. Calvin nodded, understanding more than she said. All right, then. I'll stay nearby. She gave him a look of gratitude, the kind that doesn't need words. Ryan rolled his eyes when Calvin walked away. Unbelievable, he muttered. We're babysitting now. The words hung in the air, brittle and ugly. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had spent decades learning when silence spoke louder than protest. Every insult she hadn't answered became a layer of armor. And tonight, that armor gleamed brighter than any chandelier above her. If I stand up, they'll say I made a scene. If I sit still, they'll think I don't belong. But sometimes, dignity means staying seated until the world catches up to your reason. Her eyes flicked toward the door. Still no sign of Marcus. The digital clock behind the bar turned 7:03. She was never one to worry about his punctuality. Her son was the kind of man who always showed up when it mattered, and she knew tonight would matter. At the next table, A middle-aged couple whispered to each other. The woman shook her head. "That poor lady," she said under her breath. He shouldn't have talked to her like that. Her husband frowned. Maybe there's more to it. You never know these days. Evelyn caught fragments of their voices but kept her eyes on the tablecloth. Judgment always came wrapped in curiosity and coated with politeness. She had seen it all her life. Ryan came back, this time holding a notepad as if that would make his authority more official. "Ma'am," he began again, too loud for politeness, "if you can't order now, I'll really have to ask you to leave. This is policy." Evelyn looked up, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Do you treat all customers this way?" He hesitated. "Only the ones who sit without ordering. Or the ones who look like me." Ryan blinked. "Excuse me. You heard me." For a brief second, the entire restaurant held its breath. Even the soft music seemed to hush. Ryan's face flushed. "That's not fair," he said quickly. "I'm just doing my job." "Then you should learn what your job truly is," Evelyn replied, her tone as even as the ticking clock. Jasmine's live stream had already passed 500 viewers. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. Someone typed, "She's teaching him more with silence than 1,000 protests ever could." Ryan stepped back, flustered, pretending to busy himself with the next table. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were still steady, though her heart beat harder now, not with fear, but with something old, something heavy that came from every generation that had waited for respect to arrive at their table. She thought of Marcus again. How, as a child, he would come home crying because someone called him a name on the playground. She would wipe his tears and say, "People speak from the limits of their understanding, not from the truth of who you are." And now, years later, he spoke for a whole city. Yet here she was, sitting in the very system he worked to reform, watching its prejudice unfold like clockwork. "If I tell them who you are, Marcus, they'll apologize to me, but learn nothing. Let them face their reflection before they know your title." Calvin noticed the way she glanced at her watch, the engraved silver catching the light. "He's running late," he asked gently. She smiled faintly. Good things take time. The door opened briefly, a rush of cold air, a new couple entering, laughter, perfume, the sound of another world carrying on as if nothing were happening in the corner booth. Ryan checked his phone again, his confidence thinning as he realized people were still watching, still filming. Megan peeked from the office, her face pale under the soft yellow lights. No one could explain why they suddenly felt uneasy. Maybe it was the way the woman didn't move, didn't bend. Maybe it was the sense that they had already lost something they couldn't name. At 7:10, Evelyn took a sip of her now warm water. The ice had melted, leaving the glass half full. She looked at the droplets sliding down its side and whispered, barely audible, even to herself, "Stillness is its own kind of storm." Outside, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Its headlights washed across the restaurant's glass facade before turning off. A figure stepped out, tall, composed, carrying the stillness of authority in his shoulders. But Evelyn didn't turn to look. She stayed as she was calm, waiting, unshaken. The restaurant staff had not yet noticed who was approaching. She closed her eyes briefly, hands folded in her lap. Let them see who they've been speaking to. Let them understand, not because of power, but because of conscience. The door opened again. The sound of polished shoes against marble echoed through the lobby. "Mom," a voice said softly. Every head turned, and that was the moment when silence itself became a witness. The word mom still lingered in the air, soft and steady, but Ryan didn't register it. His attention had already shifted back to Evelyn, his irritation now resting somewhere between embarrassment and anger. He hadn't noticed the black SUV parked outside, or the small crowd forming near the front windows. His world was still the table, the woman, and the feeling that somehow her calmness mocked him. He stepped closer. "Look," he said, his tone sharper now. "If you want to eat here, you need at least $50 on you. We don't do tabs or charity?" A few customers turned their heads. Some froze in disbelief. Others quietly lowered their eyes, unwilling to be part of the scene. The chandeliers seemed to hum louder, as though the air itself had turned against the sound of his voice. Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes lifted slowly from the table to meet his. $50, she repeated softly, as if testing the weight of his demand. Ryan smirked, mistaking composure for weakness. "That's right. Cash, up front." There was no tremor in her hands, no shake in her voice. She simply looked at him steady, thoughtful, quiet, the kind of silence that makes others hear themselves too clearly. "He doesn't know who I am," she thought, "and that's exactly why this matters." From the corner booth, Jasmine Reed adjusted her phone. Her live stream had already started 10 minutes ago, her viewers trickling in with curiosity. But when Ryan raised his voice, the comments began to flood the screen. What did he just say? Did he really ask for cash? That's racial profiling right there. Jasmine zoomed in slightly, catching both their faces, the coldness and the stillness in hers. Ryan, unaware of the digital stage forming around him, pressed on. Ma'am, you understand. Right. We just have to make sure people can actually afford to dine here. Last month someone came in, ordered a steak, and couldn't pay. It's bad for business." "Bad for business," Evelyn repeated again, her tone neither bitter nor amused. "Is that what I am to you? Young man, a risk to your business." Ryan's smirk faltered for the first time. "I didn't say that. I just, rules are rules. Rules," she murmured. "Or assumptions." The room went quiet again. Even Calvin, standing a few feet away, had stopped pretending to check his radio. The hum of conversation from the other tables faded, replaced by a kind of collective discomfort. Everyone knew what they were witnessing, but no one wanted to say the word for it. Jasmine's phone buzzed in her palm as more viewers joined. "Over 2,000 now?" The comment stream raced by. "Someone call the manager. This is 2025, not 1955. She's handling this like a queen." Ryan turned, noticing the phone for the first time. "Hey, what are you doing?" Jasmine looked up, calm but firm. "Recording," she said. "Public space. Nothing illegal about it." "You can't record in here," he barked. "This is private property." "It became public," she replied, "the moment you made it about who deserves to sit down." Megan Carter appeared again from the office, her heels clicking quickly against the floor. "Ryan," she said sharply, "what's going on now?" "She's recording," he said, pointing toward Jasmine, "and this lady's still here without ordering." Megan's eyes darted to Evelyn, then to the phone, then to the small crowd forming near the front. The tension in the room was no longer invisible. It had become part of the decor. "Ma'am," Megan began carefully, "we're happy to serve you, but you'll need to place an order or free the table." Evelyn looked up at her, calm as a still pond. "I told your waiter," she said. "I'm waiting for my son." "He's on his way." "I understand," Megan said. her tone carrying the faint tremor of someone trying to manage optics more than justice. "But we have other guests arriving." Calvin shifted his stance. "She's not causing trouble," he said quietly. Megan ignored him. "Ryan, just handle this professionally," she said, though even she could hear the weakness in her own words. Jasmine's viewers were now over 3,000. Someone had shared the stream to a local community page. Comments exploded. "That's the mayor's mother. Wait, are you sure? No way. Is this Brookdale?" Evelyn didn't know about the growing storm outside the screen. She only knew that her patience was being tested, not by cruelty, but by the casual blindness of ordinary people who thought they were doing their jobs. Ryan stood there, arms crossed, caught between authority and confusion. "You can't just sit here waiting," he muttered again, quieter this time, but still unwilling to yield. Evelyn's gaze softened, the way a teacher looks at a child who hasn't yet understood the lesson. "Young man," she said, "you might want to stop before the world stops for you." For a second, he didn't understand. Then he noticed Jasmine's phone still raised, still streaming. He saw the red recording dot reflected in the glass window beside him. His confidence faltered. "You think this is funny," he snapped, voice cracking. "You think people care about this?" Jasmine didn't answer. Her silence said enough. Across the restaurant, the hum of phones began to rise. Guests were checking social media. A few gasped softly as they recognized the restaurant and the live stream, the faces, the voice of the young waiter. Ryan felt the shift before he saw it, the quiet murmur of the crowd, the side glances, the heat crawling up his neck. Megan stepped in, voice trembling now. "Ryan, step aside. I'll handle this." But it was too late. The story had already escaped the room. Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair. Her pulse was steady, her breathing slow. They always reveal themselves, she thought. You don't have to fight fire when the truth burns brighter. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. The reflection of the restaurant shimmered against the windows, trapping everyone inside a mirror of their own making. Jasmine ended her stream with a quiet statement to her audience. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the loudest thing in the room is silence." She looked at Evelyn, who nodded once, a small gesture of mutual understanding between two women who had lived in different worlds but recognized the same kind of injustice. Ryan stood by the counter, hands shaking slightly. He hadn't realized yet that the damage was already done. His words were now recorded, replayed, and shared across thousands of screens. In the quiet that followed, Calvin moved closer to Evelyn's table. "He's not worth it, ma'am," he said softly. Evelyn gave a faint smile. "Maybe not," she replied. "But the lesson might be." She looked toward the door again. The reflection of headlights gleamed across the marble floor. A shadow approached the outline of a man in a suit, walking with calm authority. Her hand brushed against the silver watch. The inscription caught the light once more. "To Mom from your mayor's son, Mom." And in that moment, before the door even opened, Evelyn already knew the story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong and had chosen to wait anyway. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air inside the Regency table was thick with that uneasy silence that follows an unspoken truth. Ryan stood by the counter, shifting from one foot to another, pretending to check the reservation list that no longer mattered. Evelyn Moore remained at her table, still, deliberate, the quiet center of a storm she hadn't created. Jasmine's phone continued to glow faintly beside her coffee cup, the live stream still rolling. The comments had slowed into stunned quiet. Thousands of unseen witnesses watching the scene unfold in real time. Evelyn looked down at her hands, folded neatly on the tablecloth. She felt neither anger nor fear, only that old, steady ache she had known all her life, the one that came from being questioned, for existing in spaces that were not built for her. Across the room, Ryan cleared his throat, as if to remind everyone that he still had authority here. "Fine," he said, voice brittle. "If you're really waiting for someone, ma'am, maybe we can help by getting the manager. She handles special situations." He said special the way someone says problem. Evelyn nodded once. That would be fine. Ryan forced a smile. "Sure thing." He turned toward the office, but his smirk returned the moment his back was to her. She'll be gone in 10 minutes, he thought, inside the manager's office. Megan Carter was already standing by the door when he knocked. She had been watching the feed from a small security monitor, uneasy but calculating. Public relations was her nightmare. Complaints like this didn't disappear easily. "She's still there?" Megan asked. Ryan nodded. "Yep. Says she's waiting for someone. Refused to order. She's holding up a table. And the recording." He glanced back toward the dining room. "That girl's still streaming. I told her to stop." "She won't." Megan sighed. She smoothed her hair, fixed her name tag, and stepped out from across the dining area. Calvin Harris watched as she approached. The retired Marine had been standing near the entrance, pretending to check IDs, but his eyes had never left Evelyn's table. Something in his instincts, honed from years of reading rooms before they broke apart, told him this wasn't about restaurant policy. It was about pride. Megan stopped beside Evelyn's table, folding her hands the way managers do when they've already decided who's at fault. "Good evening, ma'am," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Megan, the manager here. My staff tells me there's some confusion about your order." Evelyn looked up, polite as ever. "There's no confusion. I'm simply waiting for my son. He's on his way." "I understand," Megan replied, glancing quickly at the half-empty glass of water. "But we have a policy about holding tables during peak hours. If you're not ordering soon, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to wait outside." Ryan stood slightly behind her, arms crossed, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. Calvin took a slow step forward, his voice steady. "She's not causing any trouble. Ms. Carter. She's been quiet the whole time." Megan didn't turn toward him. "Thank you, Calvin, but I'll handle this." Evelyn's tone remained gentle. "I appreciate your concern," she said to Megan, "but I've already explained I'm here for dinner, just not without my son." Megan exhaled through her nose. "And when will he be arriving?" "Soon," Evelyn said. "He's finishing a meeting at City Hall." Something flickered across Megan's face, a brief hesitation. "City Hall," she repeated. "Yes." Megan tried to process that. She looked at the woman again, her plain coat, her simple purse, the gray strands of hair neatly pinned back. It didn't fit the image of someone from City Hall. She dismissed the thought. "I see," she said. "Still, without an order?" "We can't," Ryan interrupted. Louder this time. "We can't just let people sit here for free. If she wants to wait, she can do it in the lobby." The customers near the bar pretended to be absorbed in their meals, but the tension had crept into their posture, their eyes darting between the staff and the elderly woman who hadn't raised her voice once. Evelyn took a slow breath. "You think I'm here for free?" Ryan hesitated, realizing how harsh that had sounded. "That's not what I—" "It's exactly what you meant," she said softly. "And it's all right. I've heard worse." Her calmness unsettled him more than anger would have. Calvin stepped closer. "Maybe we just let her stay. It's one table. She said her son's coming." Megan's patience thinned. "Calvin, please. I have to think about policy, not sentiment. Policy. That word again. The safe word people used to hide behind." Evelyn reached into her purse and quietly placed a folded card on the table. The embossed gold letters shimmered faintly under the chandelier city of Brookdale, Office of the Mayor. Neither Megan nor Ryan noticed. Or maybe they didn't want to. Evelyn tucked it back into her purse without another word. Ryan leaned in again. His tone clipped. "Ma'am, you can stay if you order something now. Something from the dinner menu. The steak. Maybe. It's $59. He said it like a test." Evelyn looked at him, her expression unreadable. That's quite a price for kindness. Ryan blinked. "Excuse me." She smiled faintly. "You're charging for decency, aren't you?" Megan stepped in quickly. "Let's all stay calm," she said, trying to keep control. "No one's being unkind here." But her voice wavered. Even she could hear it. From her booth, Jasmine whispered quietly to her phone. "She's standing her ground. She told her viewers, this woman isn't breaking policy. She's exposing it." The number of viewers crossed 5,000. Evelyn adjusted the napkin on her lap, as if settling in for a long wait. "You said I could order," she asked. Ryan nodded. Suspicious. "Then I'll have 2 glasses of water," she said, "and a chair for my son when he arrives." Megan opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing in the handbook for this. Calvin exhaled softly, a quiet chuckle buried in his chest. He looked at Ryan, then at Megan, and for the first time, didn't bother to hide his disappointment. "You know," he said quietly, "I fought in places where people were judged by uniforms. Thought I left that behind when I came home." His words fell heavy between them. Megan's eyes darted toward the door. Outside, the black SUV still waited, its headlights off, engine humming low. Inside, Evelyn sat motionless, her expression calm, her dignity intact. She had said all she needed to. The rest was now in motion, set off not by anger, but by grace, too steady to be ignored. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, she thought. It's the sound of truth getting ready to speak. And when the door opened moments later, letting in a gust of cool night air and the tall figure stepping through it, no one in that room yet realized that the balance of power had already shifted. The clock above the bar read 6:59. The second hand trembled at the edge of 7, the way the sky trembles before the first crack of thunder. In the Regency Table, the hum of dinner chatter had turned into something else, quiet curiosity, the hush that falls over a room before history decides to remember. Evelyn Moore sat still at her table, the same table she had claimed an hour ago with nothing but patience and quiet certainty. Around her, 5 members of the staff had gathered. Ryan at the front, Megan slightly behind him, 2 waiters hovering near the bar, and Calvin by the door. The tension between them was no longer about a policy or seat. It was about a woman who refused to disappear. Ryan's voice cut through the stillness. "Ma'am, we've been more than fair. You've refused to order. You've refused to leave. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to call the police." He said the last word with the confidence of someone who thought it would end things. Police. That word had always carried weight. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She adjusted the napkin in her lap, her movements slow, deliberate. Then she looked up at him with a calm that made everyone else's composure look fragile. "Do what you feel you must," she said quietly. Ryan blinked. "Excuse me. I said," she repeated, her voice soft but steady, "do what you must. But I will wait for my son." It wasn't defiance that filled her tone. It was something older, heavier, like a truth passed down from every mother who had ever taught her children to hold their heads high in a world that asked them to bow. The two younger waiters shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't signed up for this. This wasn't the kind of training video corporate showed. Megan stepped forward, her voice tight. "Professional. Mrs. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this can't continue. You're causing a scene." Evelyn's eyes softened. "A scene," she echoed. "You mean sitting quietly? People are watching," Megan insisted. "Yes," Evelyn said. "They are." From the far table, Jasmine's live stream captured every moment the 5 uniforms surrounding one seated woman, the difference between power and grace laid bare in a single frame. The comments on her feed filled faster than she could read. "They're really calling the police on her. This is disgusting. She's not even arguing." Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, the evening lights of Brookdale glowed faintly across the street. She could almost see the outline of City Hall in the distance. The thought of her son, still in some meeting, unaware of what was happening here, gave her both comfort and sorrow. All your life you've told people to wait for the world to catch up, she thought. But sometimes the world never does until it's forced to stop and look at you. Megan pulled out her phone. "Fine," she said, exhaling sharply. "If you refuse to leave, I'll have no choice but to report a disturbance." Calvin moved closer, his voice low, almost pleading. "Megan, don't do that," he said. "She's not disturbing anyone. She's just waiting. This isn't your call." "Calvin," Megan snapped. He didn't back away. Maybe it should be someone's call to do what's right. Evelyn glanced at him in acknowledgement, brief but real. Then she looked back at the others. "You've all worked hard today," she said quietly. "You don't need to make this harder. I'm just a woman waiting for her child." Her calmness unnerved them more than anger could have. Ryan crossed his arms, defensive. "You can't just sit here and do nothing." Evelyn tilted her head. "That's the thing about dignity," she said. "It looks like nothing to those who've never had to fight for it." Megan froze, unsure how to respond. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Forks stopped. Wine glasses hovered midair. Even the jazz music from the speakers had faded in background static. Ryan's hand trembled slightly as he gestured toward the phone in Megan's grip. "Just call them," he said. "End this." But Megan didn't move. The eyes of the room were on her now, not on Evelyn, not on Ryan, on her. The manager who had to decide whether policy meant more than principle. Jasmine's camera caught every heartbeat of hesitation. The live stream counter climbed past 8,000. Finally, Megan spoke, voice softer now. "Please, ma'am, we're asking nicely." Evelyn looked up again, her face serene. "And I've answered nicely." Her words were simple, but they carried the quiet gravity of someone who had spent a lifetime teaching others how to stand tall without shouting. "I've been turned away before," she thought, "from restaurants, from doors, from respect. But I've never turned away from myself." Calvin looked down at his radio. The call button blinked, waiting. He didn't press it. Instead, he said, "It's almost 7. Maybe her son's just late." Evelyn smiled faintly. "He's always right on time." Outside, Headlights slowed at the curb. "Inside." Ryan paced, his confidence unraveling. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "If anyone else did this, we'd have them escorted out." "Maybe," Calvin said, "but maybe not everyone else is being treated the same way." Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Evelyn rose slightly, not enough to stand, but enough to shift the balance of the room. "Young man," she said, her tone measured, "I've lived long enough to know when people mistake quiet for weakness. Don't make that mistake tonight." Her words hung there, calm and final. Ryan's breath caught. For a moment, he saw her not as a nuisance, but as something immovable, a mountain disguised as a woman in a plain gray coat. Megan looked toward the window again, something flickering in her eyes, a faint realization, perhaps, that this moment was no longer in her control. The second hand on the clock reached the top. 7 o'clock. The door opened. The sound of polished shoes against marble filled the silence like the first note of an overture. A man stepped in tall, composed, gray suit catching the last of the evening light. His face was familiar to half the city, but no one here recognized him yet. He looked around once, scanning the room, his gaze settling on the woman sitting alone at table 9. Evelyn turned her head just slightly, the corners of her lips curving in relief and something deeper vindication, not for herself, but for what she represented. "I told you," she said softly. "I'm waiting for my son." And as he crossed the floor toward her, every pair of eyes in that restaurant began to understand. The room, the rules, the hierarchy, everything they thought they knew about who mattered and who didn't was about to change. When the door opened and the tall man in the gray suit stepped inside, the air in the Regency Table shifted, almost imperceptibly. But before anyone could recognize who he was, the moment stretched thin. Time seemed to pause, not in awe, but in tension. Evelyn remained seated, her composure unbroken. Ryan, still clutching his order pad like a shield, glanced at the man, then back at her. He didn't yet understand that his story had already left the room. At the back table, Jasmine Reed's phone continued its quiet broadcast. The red recording light glowed in the dimness, unwavering. Her live stream counter ticked upward like a heartbeat 900, 1 Theulers, 1 200. The comments scrolled faster than her eyes could follow. "This can't be real. They're really surrounding her like that. This is straight-up racism. Why isn't anyone helping someone in another state?" Had already clipped the earlier exchange, Ryan's demand for cash. The line about $50 and reposted it. Within minutes, it was shared on 3 social media platforms. Inside the restaurant, none of them knew. They only felt the strange pressure of being watched, the invisible weight of judgment settling over every movement, every word. Megan Carter stood by the counter, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was lower now, her words careful but urgent. "Yes. I need assistance at the Regency Table. We have a situation, an uncooperative woman causing a disturbance." She hesitated before the word disturbance. It didn't feel right, but she said it anyway. "Describe her," the dispatcher asked. Megan's eyes flicked toward Evelyn. African-American, elderly, mid-60s, refusing to leave. Calvin heard the description from where he stood and felt something twist in his gut. He looked at Megan, his jaw tightening. "She's not disturbing anyone," he said quietly. "You know that." Megan turned away, the phone still at her ear. "I have to follow procedure," she whispered. Calvin shook his head. "Procedure's not an excuse for blindness." He walked toward Evelyn, who sat calm as ever, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips, not amusement, but recognition. She had seen this pattern before. She had lived through decades of it. They always call it procedure, she thought, the polite word for fear. Across the room, the other diners had begun recording too. Phones appeared above the tables like pale blue fireflies. No one spoke to her. No one intervened. They simply documented, as if justice were something to be witnessed, not lived. Jasmine's live stream surged past 2,000 viewers. Her voice stayed steady as she narrated. She's sitting there quietly. No shouting, no violence. And yet they called the police. The comments came faster. This is what dignity looks like. She's all alone, and still stronger than any of them. I'm sending this to the Brookdale Times. Megan hung up the phone and exhaled. They're on their way, she said softly, to no one in particular. Ryan nodded, relief flickering in his expression, as if authority would somehow fix the discomfort he had created. He turned toward Evelyn again. You heard her. Ma'am, the police are coming. You could still leave before they arrive. Evelyn lifted her gaze slowly, and for the first time, Ryan felt the full weight of it. It wasn't anger that met his eyes. It was something heavier truth without apology. You think that frightens me? She asked. Ryan faltered. No. I've lived long enough to see men with badges, with power, with pride. None of them could touch what they didn't understand. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the room. Even Jasmine stopped speaking, letting the words hang. Every room I've ever walked into tried to tell me where I didn't belong, Evelyn thought, and yet I am still here, still waiting, still whole. Outside, the night had deepened. Traffic slowed as people began to gather near the restaurant's wide glass windows, drawn by whispers of what was happening inside. Some had seen the live stream and recognized the address. Inside. Ryan shifted again, his confidence eroding under the silence. You're making this harder than it has to be, he muttered. Evelyn tilted her head. For whom, he didn't answer. Megan rubbed her temple, her pulse quickening. She could feel the stares from the other tables, the judgment not just from customers, but from the unseen thousands on the internet. We're not the bad guys here, she said quietly. We're just trying to keep order. Calvin's voice came from behind her. Order built on disrespect isn't order. It's fear wearing a tie. The room turned toward him. He met Evelyn's eyes for a moment, a silent exchange of respect between two people who understood what it meant to stay steady when others broke. Jasmine's screen lit up with a sudden flood of comments. Channel 5 is streaming this now. This is Brookdale. Right. The Regency Table. Someone tagged the mayor. Her eyes widened. They already did, she whispered. The number on her stream jumped again. 3-800-4100-4900. The viewers began naming it. The Brookdale incident, modern segregation, public humiliation caught on tape. Evelyn remained still, unaware of the names they were giving her moment. She didn't need them. She had her own. Calm, steady, waiting. Ryan paced behind Megan now, agitated. If the cops take too long, I'll handle this myself, he said. Megan's voice snapped. You'll do no such thing. But Ryan was unraveling. You don't understand. This whole thing, she's making us look bad. Evelyn's voice cut through his panic like the quietest bell. I'm not making you anything, young man. You did that yourself. Silence again, the kind that makes a man hear his own conscience louder than any sound. Calvin exhaled, long and low. She's right. At that moment, a phone behind the counter buzzed. Megan picked it up automatically. her face paling as she read the notification live broadcast. Trending Brookdale woman denied service. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Oh my God," she murmured. Ryan leaned over her shoulder. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. His own face stared back, blurred, recorded, and replayed 1,000 times. His words, "You need $50 to eat here," captioned in bold white text. The color drained from his face. Jasmine's stream passed 5,000 viewers. Oh, the comments no longer sounded like outrage alone. They sounded like action. "Where's the mayor? Call the press. This woman deserves justice." Evelyn reached for her glass. Her hand steady. She took a sip, placed it down carefully, and folded her hands again. "They're watching now," she thought. "But I've been seen before, just never truly looked at." Outside, headlights flickered once more, brighter this time. Megan turned toward the entrance. The tall man in the gray suit had crossed halfway through the room now, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on one person. Ryan followed her gaze and froze. Evelyn's voice came, soft but certain, the same words she had spoken before. "I told you," she said. "I'm waiting for my son." And for the first time, Ryan realized what the rest of the city would soon discover, that the woman he had humiliated wasn't just a customer. She was the mother of the man who ran Brookdale. Outside, the livestream counter hit 6,000. Inside, silence claimed the room completely. Outside the Regency Table, the city lights of Brookdale flickered against the polished hood of a dark SUV. The vehicle slowed to a stop at the curb, its engine cutting into a low, steady hum. The license plate carried the city's insignia, a simple emblem of authority that most people would overlook. But to those who noticed, it meant one thing. Someone important had arrived. Inside, the tension was a living thing. Conversations had dissolved into whispers, then into silence. The sound of a phone buzzing was suddenly too loud, the clinking of a glass too sharp. The livestream counter now hovered above 6,000 viewers and climbing. Evelyn Moore sat exactly as she had before, still, composed, her fingers resting lightly on the folded napkin before her. She did not look toward the door, though every pair of eyes in the restaurant had turned in that direction. She didn't need to. She already knew. The door opened with a slow push. A man stepped through, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a gray suit that seemed to carry the last light of dusk in its fabric. He paused for half a second, scanning the room, reading it the way one reads a courtroom before speaking. His presence was quiet but complete. Even those who didn't recognize him instinctively straightened in their seats. Marcus Moore, mayor of Brookdale. He walked with measured steps, the sound of his shoes against the marble floor echoing softly through the hush. His expression was composed neither anger nor surprise, just the kind of calm that comes from years of knowing how quickly perception becomes power. Megan Carter froze behind the counter. The phone she was holding slipped slightly in her grip. Ryan, standing beside her, followed Marcus's gaze and felt the weight of it land squarely on him. He didn't yet understand why, only that something irreversible had entered the room. Marcus's eyes found his mother at table 9. She looked up, and the smallest smile curved her lips. For a moment, nothing else existed: the crowd, the cameras, the murmurs outside. Only a son seeing the quiet strength of the woman who had shaped him. He crossed the distance between them without a word. When he reached her table, he leaned down and pressed a hand gently to her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. "I'm late." The words were simple, but they struck like thunder. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was stunned. The kind of silence that happens when reality rearranges itself in front of you. Ryan blinked twice, as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had believed only moments before. The woman he had dismissed, scolded, nearly thrown out, was sitting across from the man whose face hung in every government building across the city. Megan's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at Evelyn, then at Marcus, and then at the insignia pin gleaming faintly on his lapel. "Mr. Mayor," she stammered. "I didn't realize Marcus didn't look at her yet." He pulled out the chair beside his mother and sat down, his tone calm, deliberate. "I'm sure you didn't." Evelyn reached for her glass of water and took a slow sip. Her hand was steady. She turned slightly toward her son. "You had another late meeting," she said. "City business never ends." He smiled faintly. "Not when the city keeps giving me reasons to stay busy." The way he said it, soft, even, but edged with understanding, made the air in the room shift again. Ryan swallowed hard. His voice, once sharp, now trembled. "Sir, I didn't know she was your—" Marcus turned his gaze toward him. "You didn't have to know who she was," he said quietly. "You only had to know she was someone." The line landed with the weight of truth. In the corner, Jasmine's live stream caught every word, the comment feed exploding with reactions. "That's the mayor. He called her mom. Oh my God, the waiter's done." Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving Ryan. "You refused to serve my mother," he said, his tone still calm. "Tell me, did you do that because you thought she couldn't afford a meal? Or because of the color of her skin?" Ryan's mouth opened, then closed again. He stammered. I didn't mean any harm. Sir, I was following procedure." Evelyn's eyes lifted, calm and sharp all at once. "Procedure," she said softly. "That word again." Megan stepped forward, desperate to regain control. "Mr. Mayor, I assure you this was a misunderstanding." "We value every customer," Marcus interrupted, not unkindly, but firmly. "Do you?" He looked around the room. "Because what I see are staff members surrounding an elderly woman and threatening to call the police, while everyone else pretends it's normal." He paused, letting the silence absorb his words. Calvin Harris, standing near the door, straightened his posture. His voice, steady and low, cut through the tension. "She never raised her voice, sir. She just waited." Marcus nodded. "That's what she's done all her life," he said. "Waited for people to see her for who she is." Evelyn smiled faintly, the kind of smile that forgives without excusing. She placed her hand lightly over her son's. "It's all right, Marcus," she said. "They didn't know." He turned to her. "Maybe not, but ignorance stops being innocent when it hurts someone." Megan's eyes filled with regret. She lowered her gaze. "Mr. Mayor, please, I'll take full responsibility. It was my staff's mistake." Marcus shook his head. "No, Ms. Carter, it wasn't just a staff mistake. It's a system mistake. One too comfortable with making assumptions. Around them, the restaurant's patrons sat motionless, their food untouched, their faces pale with discomfort." Evelyn folded her napkin, her voice soft but clear. "Marcus," she said, "I didn't want you to come here for this. I just wanted dinner." He looked at her, and for a brief moment, the mayor disappeared. Only the son remained. "You'll get your dinner, Mom," he said, "and you'll never be treated like this again." The live stream had now passed 8,000 viewers. News outlets had begun picking up the feed. Across Brookdale, Phones buzzed with notifications. Mayor confronts restaurant over racial incident. Ryan's face had gone pale. Megan's eyes shone with the kind of guilt that comes too late. Calvin stood a little taller, proud to have seen before others did. Jasmine lowered her phone slowly, realizing the moment no longer needed her narration. It spoke for itself. Evelyn reached for her son's hand again, the warmth of it grounding her. He learned this calm from me, she thought, and I learned patience from the world that tried to take it away. Marcus turned back to Ryan one last time. Next time you see someone walk through that door, he said, ask yourself what you're really seeing, a customer or your reflection. No one spoke after that. Outside, the city's night seemed to lean closer to the glass, as if listening. Inside, the Regency Table, once a place of polished marble and quiet privilege, had become a mirror. And everyone, for the first time, saw themselves clearly. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in air, as if no one dared breathe. The hum of conversation that had filled the Regency Table earlier was gone, replaced by a silence that vibrated with disbelief. Marcus Moore, the mayor of Brookdale, stood beside his mother's chair. His posture was composed, but his eyes steady, dark, and unflinching, carried the quiet weight of a man who had seen too many apologies come too late. He looked around the restaurant slowly, his gaze landing first on the faces of those who had stood by, then on the staff still frozen in their places. Finally, his attention settled on the man and woman standing closest to his mother, the waiter and the manager, who had made themselves gatekeepers of worth. His voice came low, calm and sharp as glass. "Who," he asked, "called my mother a vagrant?" The question wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The stillness made it louder than any raised tone could. Ryan's face went pale. He shifted his weight, the order pad in his hand suddenly feeling childish, useless. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus's eyes didn't leave him. "Is that what you call it?" Megan stepped forward, her voice breaking slightly. "Mr. Mayor, please, if I may, none of us knew who she was. We didn't mean any disrespect." Marcus turned toward her slowly. "You didn't know who she was," he repeated, his tone even. And that was the problem. No one moved. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. Jasmine's live stream caught the moment in perfect stillness. The number on her screen surged 4,000, then 4,500, the comments bursting with emotion. He asked the question. This is justice in real time. They're about to learn what respect means. Marcus's voice carried across the room, measured and deliberate. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. You shouldn't need a title, or a position, or a name on a plaque to remember your own humanity. Ryan tried to speak again, words tumbling uselessly. "Sir, I swear, I didn't mean." Evelyn's voice cut through, gentle but firm. "He's right. She said they didn't know. And that's exactly what makes it worth remembering." Her tone wasn't bitter. If anything, it carried a grace that made the shame in the room heavier. Marcus turned slightly toward her, his expression softening. "Mom, you shouldn't have had to face this. I've faced worse," she said quietly. "What matters now is what happens next." Jasmine's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her phone. The feed now had over 5,000 viewers. Someone from the Brookdale Times had joined the chat. Another user claimed to be from Channel 5 News. The comments were filled with outrage, but also admiration for Evelyn, for her calm, for her strength. Megan swallowed hard. "Mr. Mayor, please," she said. If I had known, Marcus stopped her gently. If you had known she was my mother, you would have smiled, offered her the best seat, and told Ryan to bring water. But you didn't know. You saw an elderly black woman sitting alone, and you assumed she didn't belong here. His words were neither loud nor cruel. They were precise, the kind that didn't just accuse, they revealed. Evelyn sat quietly, her eyes on her folded hands. He learned this tone from me, she thought, the calm that sounds like thunder. Marcus took a step closer to the staff, his gaze steady. You see, that's what prejudice looks like when it's dressed in politeness. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles while it tells you that you're not welcome. Megan's lips parted, but no defense came. The truth didn't leave room for explanations. Calvin Harris, who had been watching from near the door, straightened slightly. His voice, deep and deliberate, broke the silence. She didn't do anything wrong. Sir? She was patient, polite. I told them that. Marcus looked at him, a faint nod acknowledging what he already sensed the guard had seen before others did. Thank you, he said. Calvin dipped his head once. Just doing what's right. Ryan's hands trembled slightly at his sides. The phone on the counter buzzed again. Megan turned to glance at it. A notification lit up Channel 5. His live mayor confronts racial bias at Brookdale restaurant. Ryan's throat tightened. Sir, I'm sorry, he said quietly. Truly. I thought she... Marcus interrupted him with a calmness that was more final than anger. You thought wrong. And the problem isn't just what you thought, it's why you thought it. No one spoke after that. The truth had already filled the air. Outside the windows, people had begun gathering on the sidewalk. Some recognized Marcus immediately. Others held up their phones, recording the scene through the glass. Inside, Jasmine lowered her camera slightly, her voice soft as she spoke to her audience. He's not yelling, she whispered. He's just holding the mirror up, and no one likes what they see. Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes gentle but unyielding. Marcus, she said quietly, this isn't just about me. It's about the next woman who walks in here and doesn't have a mayor for a son. Her words landed like the closing note of a symphony. Simple, perfect, irrefutable. Marcus's expression softened. I know, he said, and that's exactly why this ends tonight. Megan took a step forward, her voice breaking. Please, Mr. Mayor, we'll do anything to make this right. I'll issue a statement, retrain staff, whatever's necessary. He turned toward her. You'll start by acknowledging what this was. Don't call it a misunderstanding. Don't hide behind policy. Say what it was. Megan hesitated, her throat tightening. It was discrimination, she whispered. The words seemed to echo in the air. Jasmine's audience exploded with comments. She said it. That's the first honest thing all night. History just happened in a restaurant. Marcus exhaled slowly. That's how change begins, he said. When people finally say the word. He looked around the room one last time, his gaze resting again on his mother. You were right, Mom, he said softly. You didn't have to raise your voice to be heard. Evelyn's eyes met his, calm and proud. No one ever does, she replied. They just have to stand still long enough for the world to listen. And in that moment, with cameras still rolling and the world outside pressing closer to the glass, silence became its own kind of justice, steady, undeniable, and utterly complete. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence that had followed Marcus Moore's words hung like a veil over the restaurant. The cameras were still rolling, the live stream still streaming, but the energy had shifted less fury now, more reverence. Evelyn Moore sat quietly in her chair, her hands folded neatly, her expression as calm as it had been all evening. She did not seem triumphant. If anything, she looked tired, but not broken tired, in the way that only those who have carried quiet burdens their whole lives can be. Marcus stood beside her, protective but restrained. The mayor in him wanted to take control of the moment, but the son in him knew that it was no longer his to lead. This moment belonged to her. She took a slow breath, then looked up. "May I speak?" she asked. The question wasn't necessary. No one would have dared interrupt, but the courtesy in her tone was unmistakable. Even now, after all that had happened, she asked for permission, not power. The restaurant's manager, Megan Carter, nodded, her throat dry. "Of course, ma'am." Evelyn's voice was steady. "Even. I came here tonight because my son and I had plans for dinner. It was supposed to be simple. We hadn't sat down together in weeks." She glanced toward Marcus, and he lowered his head slightly in acknowledgement. "I arrived early, maybe half an hour before our reservation. I asked if I could wait." She paused, not for effect, but for breath. The kind of pause that comes from choosing each word carefully, respectfully. "The young man here," she nodded toward Ryan, "who couldn't meet her eyes, told me this restaurant didn't serve people like me. I asked him what kind of people that meant, but he didn't answer. He said I needed $50 cash just to sit." Gas rippled through the tables again, though most of them already knew. The live stream had carried every second of it, but hearing her say it softly, without anger, made it heavier. "I told him I'd wait anyway." She continued, "He didn't like that. Others came. They asked me to leave. I told them I wouldn't." She reached into her purse slowly, with hands that never trembled. First, she placed a folded business card on the table. The light caught the gold embossing City of Brookdale, Office of the Mayor. "This," she said, "wasn't meant to prove anything. It's just something I keep because it reminds me how far my family has come." Next, she set down a small laminated card, the parking pass for official vehicles at City Hall. "And this," she said, "wasn't to show off privilege. It's just my way to visit my son when he's too busy to come home." Finally, she unfastened her watch and placed it gently beside them. The silver gleamed under the chandelier, and the engraving caught the light. "To Mom. From your mayor, son. Mem." She didn't look at Marcus as she spoke. Her eyes remained on the objects before her, her voice carrying like a quiet hymn through the still air. "I didn't tell anyone who my son was," she said. "Not because I was ashamed, but because it shouldn't matter. No one should have to be somebody's mother, or somebody's boss, or somebody's anything just to be treated kindly." Her tone was measured, but there was something in it that reached every heart in the room, a kind of fragile truth that asked for nothing but left no one untouched. "I've lived in Brookdale my whole life," she continued. "I've seen it change. I've seen doors that used to stay closed open a little wider. I've seen good people do hard things to make the city better. But I've also seen moments like tonight, where decency depends on recognition, not humanity." She looked up then, her eyes finding Megan's. "You thought you were doing your job," she said, not unkindly. "But sometimes the job isn't what's written in the handbook. Sometimes it's what you choose to do when the handbook is wrong." Megan's eyes filled, and she nodded faintly. Evelyn's gaze moved to Ryan, who stood frozen near the counter, his face pale, hands clenched at his sides. "Young man," she said, I can tell you're not a bad person. You just forgot what it means to see someone fully. You saw my coat, not my face. My age, not my name. And maybe that's what happens when we stop looking at people and start looking at labels. Ryan swallowed, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, ma'am. I know, she said. But next time, don't be sorry, just be better. A few people in the restaurant lowered their eyes. Others looked away altogether, uncomfortable with the mirror she had just held up. Evelyn glanced briefly toward Jasmine, whose phone was still streaming. And to those watching, she said softly, don't turn this into another online outrage. Don't make me a headline. Make it a reminder. That's what justice really looks like. It's not punishment. It's correction. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the click of a camera shutter from outside the window. Then she added, her voice almost a whisper, everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, not because of who they are to someone else, but because they are someone. It wasn't a quote meant for applause, yet the air itself seemed to still around her words. Marcus looked at her with quiet pride, though his jaw was tight with emotion. Megan pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Calvin Harris, standing near the entrance, bowed his head slightly in unspoken salute. And Ryan's eyes glistened. For the first time that night, he looked directly at Evelyn, not as a customer or an inconvenience, but as a person. All my life, she thought, I've had to remind the world to see me. Tonight, the world saw itself instead. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady. Mom, he said, you've said more in 5 minutes than most people manage in a lifetime. She smiled faintly. I've had practice. Laughter rippled softly across the room, not mocking, not nervous, real. It was the first human sound that didn't feel forced all evening. Jasmine ended her live stream with a trembling voice. That, she whispered to her camera, was grace. The kind you don't learn in any classroom. Evelyn picked up her watch, her business card, and her parking pass, placing them neatly back into her purse. Then she looked at Marcus. Now, she said gently, how about that dinner? He smiled. I think you've earned something better than steak. She shook her head. No, just dinner. Like we planned. As they sat together at table 9, the same table that had almost become a stage for humiliation, but had turned instead into a lesson on humanity, the rest of the restaurant began to move again. Quiet conversations resumed, but the tone had changed. Every glance, every motion, carried a new awareness. Outside, the cameras flashed, capturing the image of a mayor and his mother 2 generations. One truth. Inside, the Regency table no longer felt like a restaurant. It felt like a mirror polished clean. The night outside the Regency table had deepened, but the light inside was painfully bright. The chandelier above Evelyn Moore's table reflected in the wide eyes of every patron still watching. What had begun as a quiet dinner reservation had grown into something else, a moment that refused to end when the plates were cleared or the cameras stopped. Marcus Moore, the mayor, had escorted his mother out through the front doors an hour earlier. People assumed that was the end, but justice, real justice, rarely leaves quietly. At 9:14 p.m., the same black SUV pulled up again to the curb. This time, Marcus wasn't alone. The door opened, and 2 figures stepped out into the cold night air. One was a woman in a navy suit, briefcase in hand, her hair tied back with the kind of precision that meant she came prepared for everything. The other was a man of medium height, glasses low on his nose, his expression unreadable but alert. They didn't look like diners. They looked like the aftermath. Sandra Lewis, City Attorney of Brookdale. David Chen, Director of the Consumer Protection Bureau. Inside. Megan Carter had just finished taking statements from staff when the door opened again. The sound of it made her flinch. She turned, expecting another customer. Instead, she saw authority calm, contained, and irreversible. Marcus entered first, nodding briefly at her. "Ms. Carter," he said evenly. "Thank you for staying late." Her voice came out thin. "Mr. Mayor, I didn't expect no," he said softly. "You didn't?" He stepped aside, allowing Sandra and David to enter. Both carried folders embossed with the city's seal. Calvin, the security guard, instinctively straightened. Ryan froze where he stood, the color draining from his face again. Sandra spoke first, her tone cool but not cruel. "The city of Brookdale takes civil rights violations seriously. Ms. Carter, Section 902. 4 of the Brookdale Anti-Discrimination Act requires all licensed establishments open to the public to provide equal service regardless of race, age, gender, or perceived social status." Her words were crisp, each syllable falling like a gavel. David Chen opened his folder and continued where she left off. "This restaurant, the Regency Table, holds multiple city permits, business operations, food and beverage, and an alcohol license, all under the city's contracting system. Under Section 9024, subsection B, the city reserves the right to suspend or revoke these privileges if a violation is confirmed." The sound of paper sliding across the table was deafening in its quietness. Megan blinked rapidly. "I don't understand. It was a misunderstanding. We already apologized." Sandra didn't raise her voice. "Apologies don't undo violations. Ms. Carter, they acknowledge them." Marcus stood still, his expression unreadable. He wasn't there as a son anymore. He was there as the mayor, the custodian of the same system that had tried to humiliate his mother. "What happened tonight," he said calmly, "isn't just personal. It's structural, and structures, when cracked, have to be repaired before they collapse on someone else." Ryan looked down at his hands. "I didn't think one sentence could end a career," he thought. "But maybe it's better that it ends mine than someone else's dignity." Sandra turned another page in her folder. "Miss Carter, you have the right to submit a written response within 72 hours. However, pending investigation, your establishment's alcohol license and city catering contract are suspended effective immediately." Megan gasped. "You can't." David's tone remained calm. "We can, and we have. The paperwork is already filed." The live stream had long since ended, but word had spread faster than any broadcast. Outside, reporters gathered behind barricades. Camera flashes lit the glass front doors like lightning. Inside, the scene was quieter but far more powerful. Marcus walked to the counter, resting a hand on the smooth surface where his mother had once been told she didn't belong. "The problem with injustice," he said softly, "is that it starts small. One moment of pride, one assumption, one look, then it grows, until it becomes the culture." He turned toward Megan and Ryan, not with malice, but with truth. "You built this place to make people feel special. But tonight, you forgot that kindness is what makes a place special, not marble floors or crystal glasses." Megan's voice cracked. "I never meant to hurt her." He nodded once. "Intentions are private. Consequences are public." Calvin stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, if I may, I think folks here just forgot to remember what respect looks like." Marcus gave him a small nod. That's exactly it. Mr. Harris. Forgetting is where it starts. Remembering is how we change it. Sandra folded her notes neatly back into her case. We'll be in contact, she said to Megan. Then to Marcus. Thank you, Mayor Moore. The process will move quickly. As they turned to leave, the staff parted silently to make way. But before he stepped outside, Marcus paused. He glanced back at the dining room at the guests still seated, the staff lingering in the corners, the weight of guilt and awakening in equal measure. I'm not closing this restaurant tonight, he said quietly. That's for the system to decide. But I want everyone here to remember something my mother said: everyone deserves kindness, not because of who they are to someone else, but because they are someone. Then he left, the words trailing behind him like a slow echo that refused to fade. Megan sank into a chair, her face pale. Ryan exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. The weight of the evening pressed down, heavy and relentless. Outside, the flash of cameras turned the night into day for a few seconds. Reporters shouted questions, their voices blurring into a wall of sound. But Marcus didn't answer. He opened the car door, helped his mother in, and nodded once to Sandra and David. Inside the car, Evelyn sat quietly, her hands resting on her purse. You didn't have to come back, she said. He looked at her, his voice low. I know, but it wasn't just about you anymore. She smiled faintly, her gaze turning toward the window where the restaurant lights glowed behind them. It never was. The car pulled away, the reflections of city lights dancing across the glass like fading stars. Behind them, the Regency Table stood still, a place that had once believed it was above consequence, now humbled, now human. And as the city of Brookdale watched, a small truth began to ripple outward sometimes. The quietest people changed the loudest systems. The morning after the incident at the Regency Table, the city of Brookdale felt different. It wasn't the noise of outrage that changed the air. It was the silence that followed it. News anchors spoke in careful tones. Radio callers argued between disbelief and shame. But at City Hall, where marble floors carried the sound of measured footsteps, things moved with quiet precision. By 10 hours, the conference room on the top floor was ready. The blinds were half drawn against the winter light. A pitcher of water sat untouched on the polished table. The city seal glimmered faintly on the wall. Marcus Moore entered first, wearing the same gray suit from the night before. His expression gave nothing away. Behind him came Sandra Lewis, city attorney, and David Chen, the director of consumer protection. They carried folders, not fury. A few minutes later, the door opened again. A man in his 50s walked in. Robert Fields, regional manager for the Regency Group. His tie was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. He had flown in at dawn from Chicago, and his smile, though polite, was strained. Mr. Mayor, he began, extending a hand. I came as soon as I heard. Marcus took it briefly. You must be tired. Mr. Fields. I am, he said, sitting. But I'm also deeply concerned. What happened last night doesn't reflect our company's values. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He opened a file, reading silently for a few seconds before setting it down. That's a good line. Mr. Fields, he said evenly. I've heard it before. The problem is, values don't mean much when the people who represent them act like they don't exist. Robert shifted slightly in his seat. I understand how bad this looks. How bad it is, Sandra corrected. Her voice was calm, sharp. Not how bad it looks. He nodded quickly. Yes, of course. how bad it is. We're prepared to make it right. The company is ready to compensate your mother, Mrs. Moore, and issue a public apology. Marcus's gaze lifted slowly. My mother doesn't need a check. Mr. Fields, she needed respect. And that can't be purchased. Robert hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Then, Mr. Mayor, what would you consider a fair path forward? Marcus leaned back slightly, hands clasped in front of him. Fair, he repeated. Fair would be making sure no one else goes through what she did. Fair would mean change that doesn't end when the headlines fade. He gestured toward Sandra and David. We've outlined a set of conditions for your establishment and all branches operating under the Regency Group within city limits. Sandra slid a folder across the table. Robert opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the list. 1. A formal public anti-discrimination policy posted in every branch of the Regency Group in Brookdale, visible to both staff and customers. 2. Mandatory bias awareness and sensitivity training for all employees, to be completed within 30 days. 3. An anonymous reporting system for customers and staff to report discriminatory behavior, monitored by the city's Consumer Bureau. 4. A community advisory council composed of civic leaders, local business owners, and citizen representatives to oversee compliance. 5. An annual donation from the Regency Group to the Brookdale Foundation for Civil Rights Education. Robert read each item carefully. His face stayed neutral, but his fingers tightened around the folder. These are significant measures, he said slowly. They're necessary, Marcus replied, because the problem isn't just one waiter. It's a culture that let him believe he was safe doing what he did. David Chen added quietly, if these terms aren't met, we'll move to revoke all 3 of your operating licenses under Section 9024. That includes your liquor permit and your city catering contract. The estimated revenue loss would exceed $7 million annually. Robert exhaled through his nose, the sound almost a sigh. Mr. Mayor, you're asking for a complete overhaul of company policy. I'm not asking, Marcus said, his voice low but steady. I'm offering a choice, reform or removal. The silence that followed was dense, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence in which truth settled, heavy but final. Robert looked down at the folder again. May I have 24 hours to consult with corporate? Marcus shook his head. You have 2. The city's legal notice goes out at noon. For a moment, Robert looked as if he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped slightly. He closed the folder. We'll comply, he said quietly. I'll sign today. Sandra nodded, opening her pen. Then we'll make it official. As the paperwork moved across the table, Marcus's thoughts drifted unspoken. Steady. Mom wouldn't have wanted punishment, he thought. She would have wanted progress. Robert signed his name slowly, the sound of the pen scratching against paper echoing in the stillness. When he handed it back, Marcus didn't smile. He simply said, Good. Then let this be the start of something better. Robert looked up at him, eyes weary. Mr. Mayor, I truly am sorry. I believe you, Marcus said. Now show the city. Outside the window, traffic hummed softly below. The life of the city moving forward as if nothing had happened. But something had, something irreversible. When Robert left, Sandra gathered her files, her voice quiet but firm. That was cleaner than most cases. Marcus nodded slightly. It wasn't about winning. It was about making sure we don't repeat this. David adjusted his glasses. You realize you just set a precedent for the entire business district? Good, Marcus said. Maybe that's what it takes. Later that afternoon, a press release went out from the mayor's office. It didn't mention names. It didn't assign blame. It simply announced that the Regency Group had agreed to a new city partnership focused on equity and public service. The public called it mercy. The media called it reform. Marcus called it duty. That evening, as he drove home, he passed the Regency Table. The lights were dimmed. A new sign hung on the door, closed for staff development. He smiled faintly. That's one way to say repentance. At home, Evelyn was on the porch, a book resting in her lap. When he approached, she looked up, her expression calm. "You worked late," she said. He nodded. "It's done. They agreed to everything." She studied him for a moment. "And you didn't raise your voice." He smiled. "Didn't have to." She closed her book. "Then maybe the world's finally learning." He sat beside her, the evening air cool and soft. For a while, neither spoke. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. The city exhaled. Justice, Marcus thought, isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. And on that quiet night in Brookdale, restoration had begun not with noise, but with a pen, a promise, and a mother's lesson that dignity never shouts. The story had burned across Brookdale like a spark in dry grass. By the time the weekend came, everyone knew the name of the Regency Table. News anchors repeated it like a cautionary tale. Commentators called it a reflection of a nation's shadow. Yet, somewhere beneath the noise, life for the people inside that story went on uneasy. But moving forward, for Ryan Cooper, the days that followed felt like walking through smoke. He still woke at 5:00, made breakfast for his son, packed the lunchbox with a tired precision that came from habit, not peace. The boy, 9 years old, asked one morning, "Dad, are you going back to the restaurant?" Ryan hesitated. He wanted to lie, but children can smell lies like rain. "Not for now, buddy," he said quietly. "Dad made a mistake." The boy tilted his head, spoon suspended midair. "Did you break something?" Ryan forced a smile. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I broke something I didn't see." That afternoon, a letter arrived. It bore the seal of the city of Brookdale. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. It was brief, formal, but not cruel. "Mr. Cooper, your employment with the Regency Group is hereby terminated, effective immediately. However, pursuant to the city's new community reform initiative, you are eligible to enroll in the Civic Equity Program, a 6-week course on service ethics and bias awareness. Completion of this program will qualify you for reapplication in city-affiliated establishments. Sincerely, Office of the Mayor." He stared at the signature. Marcus Moore. For a long time, he didn't move. The words terminated and eligible sat side by side on the paper like two sides of the same door. 3 days later, Ryan stood in a small office downtown. It wasn't City Hall, just a modest community building with mismatched chairs and the faint smell of coffee. Marcus was there, along with Evelyn. Ryan hesitated before walking in. He looked smaller somehow, the arrogance stripped away. He wasn't the man who had mocked an old woman. He was a man standing in the echo of his own words. Marcus greeted him first. "Mr. Cooper," he said, offering a hand. Ryan shook it cautiously. "Thank you for seeing me." "Sir," and for not calling the police that night. Marcus nodded. "I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in understanding." Evelyn sat nearby, hands folded in her lap. Her presence filled the room without effort. She didn't glare, didn't smile, just waited. Ryan cleared his throat. "I want to apologize again to both of you. What I said was wrong. It was cruel. I don't have an excuse. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Then don't try to make one, she said softly. Excuses are just stories we tell ourselves to feel better about the wrong things. He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. You're right. Her voice was calm, almost kind. What made you say those things to me? Ryan swallowed hard. Honestly, I thought you were someone who didn't belong there. I saw the coat, the bag. I just assumed. I was tired. I was frustrated. She interrupted gently. You were human, but that doesn't mean you were right. Her tone wasn't sharp, but it landed. Ryan's eyes lowered. My wife passed 3 years ago, he said quietly. Cancer. I've been working double shifts since then. I don't sleep much. Some nights I look at people and all I see is what I think I can handle, not who they really are. Marcus leaned back slightly, his voice steady. That's an honest answer, but honesty doesn't erase harm. Ryan nodded. I know. I don't want it to. I just want a chance to fix it. Marcus studied him for a moment. The city has a program, he said. You'll attend 6 weeks of workshops. Bias recognition, civic duty, ethics of service. After that, you can apply again. Not at the Regency Table, but somewhere new. You'll start clean, but not empty. Ryan blinked. You'd really give me that Marcus's tone didn't soften, but his eyes did. Everyone deserves a path back if they walk it. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her gaze direct but not unkind. You said you have a son. Yes, ma'am, Ryan said. 9 years old. His name's Caleb. Then show him what change looks like, she said. Don't just say the words, live them. Children remember what they see more than what they're told. Ryan nodded again, his throat tight. I will. Evelyn smiled faintly, not approval, but recognition. Good. Then maybe one day, when you meet someone like me again, you'll see the person first. There was silence for a moment, not the cold kind, but the kind that settles after truth has been spoken. Marcus stood, offering a small envelope. This covers your enrollment fee. After that, you're on your own. Ryan took it with both hands. Thank you, sir. I won't waste it. When he left, Evelyn watched him go through the window. His shoulders were bent, but his steps were steady. She turned to Marcus. You didn't have to help him. He looked at her. You taught me that justice without mercy just builds another kind of cruelty. She smiled slightly. Then maybe I did something right. He exhaled, sinking into the chair beside her. You did everything right. For a while. They sat in silence. Outside, Ryan walked down the street, clutching the envelope. The city around him was the same streets, the same noise, but he was not. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, the weight of possibility. Weeks passed. Ryan attended every session of the Civic Equity program. He listened, took notes, and stayed behind after class to ask questions. The instructor saw a man not defending his past, but learning from it. One evening, he stood before a slide that read, Empathy in Action. He raised his hand and said quietly, Empathy isn't feeling sorry for someone. It's realizing they never should have had to ask for kindness in the first place. The room went silent. When he graduated, Marcus received the report personally. Completed with distinction, it read. He smiled and placed it on his desk. Evelyn came by later, as she often did. How'd he do? She asked. Better than most. Marcus said. He applied for a job at a community kitchen. I gave him a reference. Evelyn nodded. Then that's enough. Sometimes the best justice isn't a punishment. It's a chance to prove you've changed. As the sun set over Brookdale, the city looked almost peaceful again. The noise had faded, but something deeper had taken its place, a quiet awareness, like the slow healing of a bruise. And somewhere across town, Ryan Cooper wiped down a counter in a small cafe that served free meals to those in need. He smiled at a woman who walked in, her coat worn, but her eyes kind. "Welcome," he said softly. "Please, take a seat anywhere." He didn't see Evelyn watching from the corner window, her face hidden beneath a scarf, but she saw him. Maybe grace, she thought, isn't about forgetting. It's about recognizing when the lesson has taken root. 3 weeks can feel like a lifetime when a city is watching. In Brookdale, the name the Regency Table no longer sparked outrage. It sparked curiosity. People whispered about it as if it had been reborn from something it couldn't quite forget. The restaurant that once symbolized arrogance was now learning the language of humility. Inside, the chandeliers still gleamed, but the lights seemed softer. The air was different, less heavy, more human. The sound of quiet conversation replaced the hush of discomfort that had once filled the room. A new sign hung by the entrance in simple silver letters. "Every guest is valued." The woman behind that change was Maria Alvarez, a specialist in diversity and workplace reform. Her reputation was solid, her manner unpretentious. She didn't believe in grand speeches. She believed in systems that worked. She walked the dining room that morning with a clipboard in hand, greeting staff by name, asking small questions that mattered. "How's the new menu training going?" "Calvin," she asked, pausing beside the security guard who had once watched the worst of that night unfold. Calvin straightened, a faint smile in his eyes. "Better than expected." "Ms. Alvarez, feels like folks are actually listening this time." "Good," she said. "Keep it that way. Listening is harder than it looks." She turned toward the front desk, where a familiar face now stood in a new uniform. Marcus, not the mayor, but Calvin Marcus Harris. The former guard now wore a dark blazer with a silver name tag that read, "Assistant Manager." When Maria approached, he was helping a young server set up the reservation tablet. "The key," he said gently, "is patience. Everyone walks in here wanting to be seen. Our job is to make sure they are—" Maria watched him for a moment, then nodded. "You were right for this job," she said. He smiled, a little shyly. "Feels strange being called sir." "Still getting used to that." "Well," she said, "the world's full of strange things. Change is one of the good ones." At noon, the restaurant opened its doors. The first customer of the day arrived quietly, a woman in a pale blue coat. Her steps unhurried, her presence steady as sunlight through glass. Evelyn Moore. Heads turned as she entered, but not out of spectacle, out of respect. She had been back before, but today marked something different, her first official visit as honorary quality guest. Maria met her near the entrance, smiling warmly. "Mrs. Moore," she said, "welcome back." Evelyn returned the smile. "It's good to see this place alive again." Maria gestured toward her favorite table, table 9. "Your seat is ready." "Just as before." Evelyn chuckled softly. "As long as the story ends better than before." She took her place, unfolding the menu slowly, though she already knew what she would order. Around her, the restaurant moved with quiet efficiency. The waitstaff, new faces mixed with old ones, moved with the grace of people who understood the weight of reputation. As she waited, Evelyn's eyes wandered across the room. The small plaques by the walls caught her attention, each one engraved with short phrases collected from the community. "Respect has no price tag." Every voice matters. Service is dignity in motion. Each line felt like a whisper of transformation. When her server arrived, a young woman with nervous hands and kind eyes, Evelyn smiled reassuringly. "No rush. Dear, I'm here to enjoy the waiting." The girl relaxed, smiling back. "Of course, ma'am. Would you like the roast chicken today? Please, and coffee. Black, from a distance." Maria watched. It was not oversight, it was reverence. To her, Evelyn represented more than a guest. She represented the standard. After lunch, Maria joined Evelyn for a few minutes. "We've installed the new feedback system," she explained, holding up a small card with a QR code. "Every table has one. When guests scan it, their comments go straight to the city's consumer dashboard. No filters, no delays." Evelyn turned the card in her hand thoughtfully. "So the people have a voice," she said. Maria nodded. "And this time, the city listens." Evelyn smiled. "That's how democracy is supposed to work, isn't it? Small acts that mean something." Maria's expression softened. "You'd be surprised how much of this started because of you." Evelyn chuckled quietly. "I didn't start anything, Ms. Alvarez. I just refused to move." Maria hesitated before replying. "Sometimes. That's all it takes." Later that afternoon, Marcus Moore stopped by, not as mayor, just as a son checking in. He greeted Maria, shook hands with Calvin, then walked over to his mother's table. "How's the service?" he asked with a teasing smile. Evelyn glanced up from her coffee. "Better than City Hall most days." He laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." She reached for his hand briefly. "I'm proud of what you did here." He shrugged lightly. "I just set things in motion. They did the rest." Evelyn looked around. "You gave them the chance. That's enough." He nodded, his gaze softening. "You still think about that night?" She paused, considering. "Sometimes, but only to remember what came after. Anger burns fast, but change takes time. I'd rather live in the time." He smiled quietly. "You always did know how to turn a wound into wisdom." As they spoke, customers around them ate, laughed, and talked. The tension that had once lived in the walls was gone. The Regency Table was no longer a place of exclusion. It had become a symbol of transformation. Before leaving, Evelyn took out her phone and scanned the QR card. The screen prompted her to rate her experience. She tapped 5 stars, then wrote "Service with humility, a meal seasoned with respect. Keep feeding the soul as well as the body." When she hit submit, the message went directly to the city dashboard visible to Marcus, Maria, and the entire oversight committee. A small gesture, but one that carried the weight of everything that had happened. Outside, as she stepped into the sunlight, reporters lingered across the street, unsure whether to approach. Evelyn ignored them gently, walking to her old Civic parked by the curb. Inside the restaurant, Maria called a quick staff meeting. "Before we close," she said, "I want you all to know something. The woman who just left Mrs. Moore is not our reminder of shame. She's our reminder of standard. Don't serve out of fear of headlines. Serve because it's right." The room was silent for a moment, then filled with quiet agreement. Calvin smiled from the back. "Feels good to protect something worth keeping," he said. Maria nodded. "That's the goal." As evening fell, the silver letters by the door caught the last light of day. "Every guest is valued." For the first time, the words didn't feel like a promise. They felt like truth. Evelyn, driving home through the quiet streets of Brookdale, thought about that. Maybe justice isn't loud, she reflected. Maybe it's just the sound of things finally working the way they should. And as the sun sank behind the skyline, the city that once looked away now learned to look inward and, at last, to see. 3 weeks turned into a month, and what began as one woman's silent stand had started to move through Brookdale like a current changing direction. The city was still the same on the surface, busy intersections, coffee shops opening at dawn, people going about their lives, but something in the tone of it all had shifted. At first, it was just whispers. Then came imitation. 6 other restaurants across Brookdale places that once competed with the Regency Table announced new training programs on bias awareness and customer respect. Some did it out of conscience, others out of caution, but motives didn't matter much. What mattered was that they were doing it. Reporters called it a movement without slogans. There were no marches, no picket lines, just quiet corrections in daily life. At City Hall, Marcus Moore read the headlines over his morning coffee. Local businesses follow mayor's equity lead. He smiled faintly. It wasn't about him, not really, but it reminded him that sometimes leadership was less about speeches and more about what you refused to ignore. The ripple grew. Within a few weeks, the City Council introduced Resolution 221B, a measure requiring every licensed business in Brookdale to complete an Equality and Service Respect course as part of its annual permit renewal. The debate on the floor was short but charged. Councilwoman Diane Harkins said, "We can't legislate kindness, but we can certainly make ignorance expensive." There was laughter in the chamber, but beneath it, a rare moment of unity. The motion passed 10-1. From that point on, Brookdale became something of a test case for other cities in the state. Local news called it the Brookdale Dignity Ordinance, but the story the public held on to had a more human name, the Brookdale Dignity Case. It was Jasmine Reed who made that phrase famous. Jasmine, the young woman who had live-streamed the confrontation that night at the Regency Table, had watched her clip go viral beyond anything she expected. At first, it was just anger, online hashtags, outrage, the usual noise. But Jasmine saw something more in the way people commented. There were grandmothers sharing stories from the 1960s, veterans talking about the fights they'd walked away from, and young waiters admitting that they had once thought the same way Ryan Cooper had. So Jasmine began to respond, not as a witness, but as a storyteller. She didn't shout. She asked questions. She reminded viewers that this wasn't just about one night. It was about a pattern people had stopped noticing. When Channel 5 called to offer her a position as a community and civil rights correspondent, she almost didn't believe it. "We saw your feed," the producer said. "You turned a viral moment into an education. That's what real journalism does." Her first on-air piece was titled Dignity at the Table. In it, she stood outside the Regency Table, now bright, bustling, and reformed, and spoke directly to camera. This story isn't about who was wrong. It's about who decided to make things right and what that decision started. It aired on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, it had been replayed across half the state. Evelyn watched it from her living room, her teacup warming her hands. She smiled when Jasmine mentioned her name only once, softly, Mrs. Evelyn Moore, who waited with dignity instead of anger. Evelyn set the cup down and whispered to herself, "That's enough fame for a lifetime." Meanwhile, in offices and boardrooms, people began to study Brookdale. Diversity consultants, civil reform advocates, even small-town mayors across the Midwest started referencing the case. They didn't call it an accident anymore. They called it a model. At a regional conference 2 months later, Maria Alvarez, the new manager of the Regency Table, stood on a panel beside Marcus. The moderator asked what had made reform possible so quickly. Maria leaned forward. Because the people who caused the harm were invited to fix it, she said. You can't heal a wound by pretending the injury was someone else's to repair, Marcus added quietly. My mother taught me that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you hold on to even when they try to take it away. The room went still for a moment, and then applause rose not thunderous, but warm, like respect, acknowledging its own reflection. Across Brookdale, restaurants began displaying small decals on their windows, a circle of hands, around the words, "Every guest is valued." It wasn't required. They just wanted to show they understood. One afternoon, as Evelyn walked downtown, she noticed those decals shining in shop windows like quiet little lanterns. Coffee houses, dry cleaners, diners all carrying the same message. She paused in front of one cafe she'd never entered before. The barista inside noticed her through the glass, smiled, and hurried to open the door. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I get that door for you?" She smiled back. "Thank you, young man." It wasn't grand, it wasn't history, but it was change. By the end of that year, Brookdale had been featured in the Atlantic and PBS NewsHour. National commentators debated whether a small city in the Midwest could really lead a cultural shift. But for the people who lived there, the answer was simple. They'd seen what dignity looked like when someone refused to surrender it. Evelyn never sought interviews. She didn't write essays or make appearances. But she did keep one ritual lunch at the Regency Table, once a month, always at table 9. Maria would come by to greet her, sometimes with Marcus, sometimes with Jasmine, who now carried a microphone instead of a phone. They'd talk quietly about the city's progress, the new training programs, the volunteer drives, the youth mentorships inspired by Ryan's work at the community kitchen. Yes, even Ryan. He often volunteered to speak at workshops now, talking about what bias looked like when you weren't paying attention. It doesn't come from hate, he'd say. It comes from habit. But habits can change. He never said Evelyn's name, but she heard his words once, watching a recording online, and smiled. As the sun set over Brookdale one evening, Marcus walked with his mother along the quiet downtown street. The storefronts glowed with the same decal, "Every guest is valued." Evelyn stopped for a moment, looking at the reflection of the sign in the glass. "Funny," she said softly. "All this started because someone refused to serve me." Marcus looked at her, his expression both proud and tender. "And because you refused to leave," she chuckled, her voice low and warm. "Sometimes standing your ground is all it takes to move the world." They stood there for a while, mother and son, in a city that had found its better self. One table, one choice, one person at a time. And somewhere, the phrase continued to travel through screens, through hearts, through places that hadn't yet learned what Brookdale now knew by heart. Justice isn't a storm. It's a ripple that refuses to fade. 6 months passed. Winter came to Brookdale softly that year. The snow didn't fall in sheets. It drifted slow, patient, deliberate, like the change it mirrored. The city no longer buzzed about scandal or outrage. It hummed instead with something rarer: quiet respect. In classrooms, board meetings, and civic offices, a new phrase had begun to circulate: the Moore method. It sounded academic, but its roots were simple, born not from textbooks or theories, but from one woman's choice to wait instead of walk away. Business schools began to teach it first. A professor at Brookdale University opened her lecture with a single image: Evelyn Moore sitting alone at table 9. "This," she told her students, "is not submission, it's strategy." The Moore method teaches us that the greatest leverage in reform comes from calm persistence married to lawful structure. The concept spread like seed in open ground. Law schools picked it up next, then programs in public administration. The formula was simple but revolutionary: use law as framework, media as mirror, and dignity as the message. They called it a model for sustainable reform. Evelyn called it common sense. She never attended the lectures, never gave interviews, never asked for credit. Her life hadn't changed much. She still lived in her small white house on Willow Street, still drove the same silver Honda Civic that rattled slightly at stoplights. She still went to church on Sundays, still brought lemon cake to the community center on Thursdays. But everywhere she went, people recognized her now. The grocery clerk smiled wider. The crossing guard waved longer. Teenagers held doors open just a little faster. One morning, while she waited at the bakery, a young man in a college hoodie approached her timidly. "Mrs. Moore," he asked. "I'm studying business ethics. We just learned about the Moore method." She looked up, amused. "They teach that in school now?" He nodded earnestly. "Yeah. Our professor said it's about using intellect and community instead of outrage. It's kind of the opposite of cancel culture." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Well, dear, canceling doesn't change hearts. Understanding does." He nodded, visibly moved. "It's just your story. It changed the way I think about leadership." "Thank you." She touched his arm lightly. "Don't thank me. Just remember it when it's your turn to decide what's right." He smiled and left, leaving her with her coffee and a warmth that had nothing to do with the cup. Across town, at City Hall, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing a new proposal. The file on his desk bore the title, Municipal Training Initiative, Moore Method Integration. Departments from across the state wanted to adopt it. Transportation, public safety, even hospitals. The method had outgrown its birthplace. When reporters asked Marcus to define it, he always gave the same answer. It's about using what you have: law, reason, and restraint to make the world better. My mother didn't shout, and the city listened anyway. That's the power of measured integrity. He kept her photo on the corner of his desk. In it, she sat at that same table, chin lifted slightly, a look of quiet certainty in her eyes. It reminded him daily that leadership wasn't volume, it was consistency. Jasmine Reed, now a rising correspondent for Channel 5, produced a documentary titled The Moore Method, The City That Chose Dignity. It opened with footage of that winter evening 6 months ago, the moment Evelyn had said, "I'll wait for my son." The film didn't dramatize it. It didn't need to. The power was in what didn't happen. When the documentary aired, it received national praise for its restraint. No swelling music, no edited outrage, just truth, told plainly. "This is what journalism used to feel like," wrote one viewer. The following week, Jasmine visited Evelyn at home. Cameras stayed outside. "I wanted to thank you in person," Jasmine said. "Your story gave my career purpose. I tell stories now that matter." Evelyn smiled. "Then you're doing the right kind of work." "Do you ever think about how big this got?" Jasmine asked softly. Evelyn looked out the window, where the first flakes of snow began to fall. "Sometimes, but it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to whoever chooses to learn from it." Jasmine hesitated, then said, "They're teaching your name in universities, ma'am." "Does that feel strange a little?" Evelyn admitted. "But I don't need them to remember my name. I just need them to remember the lesson." That night, as Jasmine left, Evelyn stood on her porch and watched the snow cover the streetlight glow. It reminded her of something her grandmother once said: "The quietest snowfall changes the world, even if no one hears it land." Months later, Harvard's Kennedy School of Government released a case study titled "The Moore Framework: Community Power Through Composure." The opening paragraph began with a line from Evelyn's interview, one of the few she ever gave. "You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to stand where truth can see you." The study traced how Marcus's policy reforms, paired with Jasmine's responsible media coverage, created measurable shifts in local equality compliance. It became required reading for civic leadership programs. Evelyn never read it. She didn't need to. She lived it. On a quiet afternoon that spring, she drove her Civic through downtown Brookdale. The streets looked different now, cleaner somehow. Not from paint or pavement, but from spirit. Outside the Regency Table, she saw families of every shade sharing meals, laughter spilling across the same space where silence had once been her only defense. Maria Alvarez spotted her through the window and hurried outside. "Mrs. Moore," she called, smiling. "Come in for lunch, on the house." Evelyn shook her head gently. "Another time, dear. I've got errands today." Maria grinned. "At least take a coffee to go. It's the least we can do." As Maria handed her the cup, Evelyn glanced at the sign above the door, still the same silver letters. "Every guest is valued." She nodded approvingly. "Keep it that way." Driving away, she thought about how far things had come and how far there still was to go. Progress, she knew, was never a finish line. It was a habit, like kindness. When she pulled into her driveway, her neighbor, an older white man who'd rarely spoken before, waved from across the yard. "Evenin', Mrs. Moore," he called. "Heard they're teaching that method of yours over at the university now. Guess we've got ourselves a hometown philosopher." Evelyn laughed softly. "Just a woman who got tired of bad manners." He chuckled. "Well, looks like it worked." That night, as she prepared for bed, the city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere, in classrooms she'd never see and offices she'd never visit, her name had become an idea, an approach to fairness that asked nothing more than what every soul deserved: respect without condition. Evelyn lay down, her breathing slow, her thoughts quiet. She didn't think of the cameras, or the headlines, or the words, "the Moore method." She thought of her son, of Jasmine, of Brian and his boy, of Maria and Calvin, of the countless faces she'd never meet who might one day choose patience over pride. That, she thought as she closed her eyes, is how the world changes one act of dignity at a time. Evening settled softly over Brookdale. The skyline shimmered faintly in gold and blue as streetlights hummed awake. One by one, the city felt calmer now, less hurried, more deliberate, as if it too had learned to breathe before it reacted. At the heart of downtown, the Regency Table glowed behind tall glass windows. The sign above the door, "Every guest is valued," no longer looked like a slogan. It looked like a truth the city had earned. Inside, the dinner crowd murmured gently over candlelight and silverware. Table 9 waited near the window, reserved every month at this time. 2 place settings, 1 small vase of lilies, and the faint hum of quiet jazz. Evelyn Moore arrived right on time. Her steps were steady, her dress a soft shade of lavender, her eyes full of the calm wisdom that age and experience leave behind. Marcus followed her, just behind, holding her coat with that small, familiar gesture of respect. The staff greeted them warmly. Maria Alvarez approached with a smile that reached her eyes. Mrs. Moore. Mr. Mayor. Welcome home. Evelyn returned the smile. It's good to be back. Maria. Feels like this table has seen everything. Maria laughed softly. It has. But tonight it's just dinner. She left them to their meal. For a long moment, mother and son sat quietly, watching the slow swirl of life beyond the glass. The city that had once turned its back now seemed to move in rhythm with their stillness. I can't believe it's been a year, Marcus said at last. Evelyn nodded, stirring her tea. Time moves faster once peace settles in. He looked around the restaurant. People still talk about you. You know, the Moore method, the case, the training programs. Evelyn lifted a hand gently, cutting him off with a small smile. All that noise will fade. What matters is what stays when the talking stops. He studied her face. And what do you think stays? She thought for a moment. Respect. You can't legislate it, but you can teach people how it feels. You showed them that. He smiled faintly. You started it. No, she said softly, her eyes reflecting the warm light. I just sat where truth could find me. The waiter arrived with their meal's salmon for Evelyn, steak for Marcus, and withdrew quietly. The restaurant had learned grace. Service now moved like conversation, steady, human, unforced. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. Evelyn watched them fall against the light, slow and certain, each one melting on the glass before disappearing. I used to think silence was weakness, she thought. Now I know it's strength waiting to speak through outcome. Marcus broke the quiet. Do you ever regret how it all happened? Evelyn looked at him, her expression thoughtful. No, not a day. Sometimes the world needs to see its own reflection before it can change. That night it wasn't about me. It was about what people chose to see when they looked at me. He nodded, understanding. You taught me something I keep repeating to my staff. Dignity isn't granted by titles. It's carried by behavior. She chuckled softly. Sounds like something your grandmother would have said. He smiled. Maybe it runs in the family. They ate quietly for a while, each lost in thought. Around them, conversation floated, small talk, laughter, the everyday music of lives unburdened. At the next table, a young couple sat with their daughter, maybe 10 years old. She dropped her fork, and before the waiter could reach her, Marcus stood, picked it up, and handed her a clean one with a smile. The girl giggled, whispering, "Thank you, sir." Her father recognized Marcus. "Wait, aren't you the mayor?" Marcus grinned lightly. "Tonight I'm just a neighbor." When he sat back down, Evelyn gave him a look both proud and amused. "You learned well." He shrugged modestly. "Teacher was good." Later, as dessert arrived, Maria returned with 2 small candles on the table. "For tradition," she said. "You lit the fire once. We just keep it burning." Evelyn's gaze lingered on the flame. "It's not fire," she said softly. "It's memory." Maria nodded, understanding without asking for more. Jasmine Reed entered a little while later, camera in hand but turned off. "Just passing by," she said, smiling. "Didn't want to intrude." Evelyn beckoned her closer. "You never intrude." "Jasmine, sit. Have coffee." As she joined them, the 3 generations of Brookdale's quiet reform shared a table, the witness, the leader, and the woman who started it all without meaning to. Jasmine asked gently, "If you could tell people one thing, Mrs. Moore, what would it be?" Evelyn looked at her for a long moment before answering. "That dignity is something you carry. No one can take it unless you hand it to them. And kindness, it isn't weakness. It's discipline." The words hung in the air, steady and real. Marcus nodded silently. Jasmine wrote them down in her notebook, though she knew she'd never forget. Evelyn continued, her voice calm, almost like she was thinking aloud. "Real change doesn't come from anger. Jasmine, anger burns hot, then dies out. But steady goodness, it keeps working, quietly, long after the crowd's gone home." The young reporter smiled. "That's what people love about your story. It wasn't loud. It was lasting." Evelyn's eyes softened. Then maybe they finally understand what justice sounds like. As the night drew on, the restaurant began to empty. The staff dimmed the lights, leaving only the gentle glow above table 9. The world outside was quiet. Snow falling thicker now, blanketing the city in white. Evelyn rose slowly, slipping her coat over her shoulders. Marcus stood beside her, his arm steady beneath hers. At the door, she paused and looked back at the table. Her table. "Funny thing," she murmured, half to herself. "A year ago, this was where the world showed its worst. Now, it's where I see its best." Marcus followed her gaze. "Maybe the table didn't change. Mom, maybe we did." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then it was worth waiting for." They stepped into the cold together, their footsteps soft on the snow. From across the street, the restaurant windows reflected their image, mother and son, walking side by side, beneath the sign that glowed faintly against the dark. "Every guest is valued." Evelyn's voice lingered, quiet as thought itself. "We don't shout to be heard. We stand still and let truth do the talking." The door closed behind them, the lights dimmed, and the city of Brookdale, once divided by ignorance, rested under the calm weight of a single, undeniable truth, that real justice doesn't roar, it remembers. And sometimes, the most powerful sound in the world is silence. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If you're here at the end, maybe you felt what we hoped you would, that dignity, respect, and quiet strength still have the power to change the world. Evelyn's silence was never weakness. It was wisdom. And in a time when so many rush to shout, maybe the greatest courage is to stay calm, to let truth do the talking. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of a moment when you chose patience over anger, or kindness over hate, share it. Tell someone. Let it travel the way dignity should. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of justice, compassion, and the quiet power of doing what's right, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click, every share, every story told helps this message live a little longer, because sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand tall and be seen. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.